The crack of the slap was louder than the clatter of dishes in Millie's diner. 81-year-old Harold Jennings, a black veteran who had fought in 2 wars, sat stunned as Officer Rick Dalton's hand lingered in the air, dripping with arrogance. Conversations froze, forks hovered mid-bite, and for one long second, the world stopped spinning. What had begun as a quiet morning breakfast was now the stage for an act of humiliation that would shake an entire town. But what the young officer didn't know was this: in less than 30 minutes, justice was coming, on wheels, in uniform, and commanded by Harold's son. I worked so hard to bring you this story, so if you value these powerful, true-to-life stories, please consider subscribing so I can keep creating more for you. The morning had started peacefully in Oak Ridge, a sleepy southern town where time seemed to move slower than anywhere else. Millie's diner, with its red leather booths and flickering neon sign, was one of the few places where locals gathered for coffee, gossip, and the comfort of routine. The smell of bacon and eggs lingered in the air, blending with the faint hum of the jukebox playing an old Sam Cooke tune. At a corner booth sat Harold Jennings, back straight, hands steady despite his age. His weathered face told stories that most books never could, stories of jungles in Vietnam, deserts in Korea, and nights spent fighting battles both abroad and at home. He wore a simple brown coat and a cap embroidered with faded military insignia. His glasses perched low on his nose as he carefully unfolded the morning newspaper. Harold wasn't a man who sought attention. He had lived long enough to know that in towns like Oak Ridge, standing out was often an invitation for trouble. Yet, his presence carried weight. Some respected him quietly, while others, like Officer Rick Dalton, despite the quiet strength he represented. Dalton entered the diner that morning with the swagger of someone who thought the town belonged to him. At just 32, he wore his police uniform like a crown, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with piercing blue eyes that carried more arrogance than wisdom. Dalton had developed a reputation. Some called him by the book, others whispered bully with a badge, but no one dared say it to his face. He spotted Harold at the booth and felt something burn in his chest. Maybe it was the memory of his father's rants about men who didn't know their place. Maybe it was the insecurity of knowing he had never truly earned respect, only demanded it. Whatever the reason, Dalton's jaw clenched as he approached the old veteran. "Morning," Harold said calmly, eyes not leaving the newspaper. His voice carried the weight of dignity, a tone that didn't beg, didn't fear. Dalton sneered. "When an officer of the law walks in, the least you could do is stand and show some respect." Harold slowly folded his newspaper and looked up. His eyes, though aged, were steady as stone. "Son, respect isn't given because of a badge. It's earned by how you wear it." The diner went silent. Conversations halted, and Millie, the owner, froze mid-step behind the counter. Everyone in town knew Dalton's temper. They also knew Harold wasn't a man to be intimidated. Dalton's face flushed red. He leaned closer, his voice dripping with venom. "You think because you wore a uniform 50 years ago, you can talk down to me? You're nothing but an old man sitting in a diner that doesn't belong to you." Harold didn't flinch. "I fought for this country when men like you were hiding behind their mothers' aprons. You wear that badge, but you don't understand honor." The words cut deeper than Dalton expected. Without thinking, without pausing, his hand lashed out. The sound of the slap cracked through the diner like a whip. Harold's glasses flew off, landing on the floor with a soft clink as they slid under the counter. For a moment, time froze. The room filled with a sharp scent of fear. Millie gasped, rushing from behind the counter. "Officer, what are you doing? He's an old man," she cried, placing herself between Harold and Dalton. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't waver. Dalton puffed out his chest, towering over her. "Old man or not, he doesn't talk to me that way. People like him need to learn their place." His words, sharp and venomous, echoed louder than the whispers creeping through the room. A waitress in the back began to cry silently, her hands trembling as she gripped a tray. A young busboy, no older than 16, clenched his fists, fighting the urge to intervene. Fear held everyone in their seats. Harold, still seated, lifted his chin. His cheek burned red, but his eyes carried the same steel he had worn in combat. "You may have slapped me, boy, but you can't slap the truth. That badge won't hide the cowardice in your heart." Dalton laughed coldly, mistaking Harold's calm for weakness. He shoved him back into the booth. "What are you gonna do? Call your army buddies?" He strutted toward the door, each step meant to show dominance, but dominance rooted in fear rarely lasts long. In the back of the diner, the waitress who had been crying slipped into the kitchen. She didn't call the sheriff. Everyone knew Dalton had the sheriff wrapped around his finger. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number burned into memory: Marcus Jennings. Marcus wasn't just Harold's son. He was a colonel in the United States Army, a man who commanded respect across ranks, a man who carried his father's dignity like a shield. When the call came through, Marcus was in a nearby city on leave. The trembling voice on the other end only needed to say one thing: "It's your father." A cop eyed him. The air around Marcus shifted. His voice, calm yet loaded with suppressed fire, asked only one question: "Where?" Back in the diner, Harold straightened his coat and picked up his fallen glasses. Millie knelt beside him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Harold. I should have done more." Harold placed a gentle hand on hers. "You did enough, Millie. Fear keeps people quiet. I've seen it all my life, but fear doesn't last forever." The other patrons avoided Harold's gaze, guilt painted across their faces. None had stepped in. Not one voice had challenged Dalton's cruelty. Harold sighed deeply, the weight of decades pressing on his chest. He knew what silence felt like. He had tasted it in the trenches when he returned home from war. Medals on his chest yet doors slammed in his face. He had carried that silence through protests, through marches, through nights when crosses burned on lawns. But today would be different. Outside, Dalton leaned against his cruiser, smirking. To him, it was another day of proving dominance, another notch on the belt of intimidation. He had no idea that time was ticking against him, that within 30 minutes, the rumble of engines would shatter his illusion of power. And inside the diner, Harold sat upright, as if bracing for the storm he knew was coming. He whispered under his breath, not for anyone else but himself: "Respect isn't begged for, it's demanded by living with honor." The townsfolk shifted uneasily, some staring at the old man with newfound respect, others glancing nervously at the door, as though expecting retribution. And that's when the waitress returned from the back, her eyes wide but steady. She placed her phone on the counter, her hands trembling. "He's coming," she said softly. Millie's brow furrowed. "Who's coming?" The waitress swallowed hard. "His son, Colonel Marcus Jennings." A ripple went through the diner. Some gasped, others exchanged glances. The name carried weight. Even in Oak Ridge, people had heard of him, the disciplined soldier who had risen through the ranks with unshakable loyalty to his men, and to his father. Dalton, overhearing from outside, scoffed. "Colonel or not, this is my town." But his voice betrayed a hint of unease. Inside, Harold simply adjusted his cap. "Then I suppose Oak Ridge is about to learn what real honor looks like." If you had been sitting in that diner when Officer Dalton struck Harold, would you have stepped in to defend the old veteran, or would fear have kept you silent like the others? The minutes after Dalton's slap stretched endlessly, like a wound refusing to close. The air in Millie's diner was heavy, filled with the weight of guilt and fear. The old ceiling fan above spun lazily, clicking on every turn, as if mocking the silence that had fallen over the townsfolk. Harold Jennings sat with his head high, cheek still stinging, but his spirit unbroken. His steady gaze swept the room, not in anger, but in quiet acknowledgement of every person who had watched and done nothing. Some looked away in shame, others pretended to focus on their plates. Dalton remained outside, leaning against his cruiser. He chewed gum with arrogance, flashing his badge at anyone who dared look too long. In his mind, the diner incident was finished, another lesson taught, another show of dominance. But his confidence was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Inside the diner, whispers began to spread. The young busboy, Miguel, finally broke the silence. His fists were still clenched, his eyes burning. "We all just sat here," he muttered, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. "We let him do that to him." Millie placed a hand on Miguel's arm. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. Dalton has the sheriff, the council, half the town under his thumb." Miguel shook his head, voice trembling. "That doesn't make it right." Harold turned his gaze to the boy, offering the faintest smile. "Son, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the whisper that says next time, I won't stay silent." "Don't carry guilt for what fear chained down." The busboy's eyes glistened, but he nodded. Harold's words planted a seed, small, but destined to grow. News of the incident spread quickly. In Oak Ridge, gossip traveled faster than any headline. A patron who had witnessed the slap left the diner, typing furiously on his phone. Within minutes, a Facebook post appeared. "Officer Rick Dalton just assaulted an old black veteran at Millie's diner. I saw it with my own eyes. This is who protects our streets." The post exploded. Comments flooded in. Some defended Dalton, claiming Harold must have provoked him. Others were outraged, demanding accountability. Photos of Harold sitting in the diner, his face red, his glasses slightly bent, circulated online. By the time Marcus Jennings was halfway to Oak Ridge, The story was already trending locally. Hashtags appeared, "Justice for Harold and Oak Ridge Shame." But not everyone was comfortable with the attention. In a dimly lit office at the police department, Sheriff Tom Willis scrolled through his phone, lips pressed in a tight line. Dalton was his protege, the officer he had groomed to carry on his legacy. A scandal like this threatened everything. "Rick," Willis muttered under his breath, "what have you done?" Dalton himself wasn't immune to the shifting tide. As he leaned against his cruiser, a group of teenagers across the street began filming him, their phones pointed directly at his face. Dalton spat on the ground and barked, "Get those cameras out of my face." But the teens only grinned wider. One of them, bold and unafraid, shouted, "You scared, officer? You should be. The world's watching." Dalton's jaw clenched. He shoved himself off the cruiser and stormed back into the diner, hoping to reassert control. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The tension was no longer one-sided. People looked at him differently, less fearful, more resentful. The power dynamic was shifting, and Dalton felt it in his bones. "Everyone back to eating," he barked. "Show's over." But no one moved. Harold, still calm, leaned forward slightly. "Seems the people aren't so eager to follow orders anymore, son." The word sliced through Dalton like a blade. He wanted to lash out again, but something stopped him, the collective weight of every set of eyes staring back. Meanwhile, Marcus Jennings was closing in. His military convoy wasn't settled. The deep rumble of engines rolled like thunder across the highway. Civilian cars pulled over instinctively, intimidated by the line of Humvees and tactical vehicles moving with precision. Inside the lead vehicle, Marcus sat in silence. His uniform was crisp, decorated with medals that spoke of valor and sacrifice. His jaw was set, his eyes forward, but his mind replayed the words he had heard. A cop hired him. His father had taught him patience, honor, restraint. But this was beyond forgiveness. "Sir," his aide in the passenger seat asked cautiously, "do you want us to stop at the station first?" Marcus's voice was calm but firm. "No, we go to the diner. My father first. Everything else comes after." Back at Millie's, Dalton tried to re-establish dominance. He paced the diner, glaring at each patron as though daring them to speak. "You all think this is some big deal," he scoffed. "An old man mouthing off, and I put him in his place. End of story." But Miguel couldn't hold his tongue any longer. He stood, fists trembling. "You didn't put him in his place. You put yourself in the gutter." Gasps filled the diner. Dalton's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward, but Millie stepped between them, her apron stained with the grease and courage. "Touch that boy, and you'll answer to me," she said firmly. Dalton hesitated. The balance of fear was slipping away. From the corner booth, Harold's voice cut through the tension like a steady drumbeat. "Every time you raise your hand, you reveal how small you truly are." Dalton's eyes narrowed. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Unbeknownst to Dalton, Miguel had pulled out his phone, live streaming the entire encounter. Hundreds tuned in, then thousands. Comments flooded the screen. "Who is this cop? He's done. Respect to the old man. He's unshakable. Where's this colonel's son they're talking about?" The live stream reached beyond Oak Ridge, beyond the state. It caught the attention of veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and journalists. Dalton's arrogance was unraveling in real time. Every sneer, every threat, every ounce of venom was now public record. And then, the sound arrived, a low rumble, distant at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Windows rattled, coffee cups trembled on their saucers. The townsfolk rushed to the windows, their eyes widening as military vehicles rolled down Main Street. Humvees, tactical trucks, soldiers in uniform. Dalton froze, his bravado cracked like thin ice under weight. The convoy slowed, engines idling like a heartbeat. Soldiers stepped out, their boots striking pavement in unison. The sight alone was enough to silence Oak Ridge, and at the center of it all, stepping out of the lead Humvee, was Colonel Marcus Jennings. The diner doors swung open. Marcus entered, the room parting around him like waves. His presence was magnetic, his authority undeniable. His eyes locked on his father first. Harold, battered but unbowed, gave the faintest nod, a silent exchange of respect. Then Marcus's gaze shifted, cold, focused, piercing straight through Dalton, who now seemed smaller than ever. Marcus's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command. "Who put their hands on my father?" No one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Dalton's badge felt heavier than the gun at his side. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by fear. Before Dalton could respond, another officer stepped into the diner. It was Deputy Earl Thompson, a man who had always followed Dalton's lead but never quite shared his cruelty. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he held a folder. "Colonel Jennings," Earl said nervously, I need to show you something." He placed the folder on the counter. Inside were reports, complaints against Dalton, assaults covered up, evidence buried, victim silenced. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," Earl admitted. "I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry." The room buzzed with shock. Dalton's crimes were no longer rumor. They were documented. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You've not only disrespected my father, you've disgraced the very badge you hide behind," Dalton stammered. You can't just storm in here with soldiers. This is my jurisdiction." Marcus stepped closer, towering over him. "Respect isn't jurisdiction. Respect is earned. And today, this town learns what real authority looks like." The soldiers outside stood firm, their presence a reminder that Marcus wasn't alone. The live stream continued, thousands now watching as the climax drew near. Dalton's hands shook, his swagger was gone. For the first time, he looked exactly what he was, a small man drowning in his own hate. The diner doors swung open again, and Sheriff Willis stormed in, his face red with fury. "What's going on here? Marcus Jennings, you can't bring the damn army into Oak Ridge." Marcus didn't flinch. Then maybe Oak Ridge should have protected its citizens. Instead, it allowed this man to assault an 81-year-old veteran. The sheriff tried to bluster, but Earl stepped forward, handing him the folder. "It's over, Tom. We've hidden his crimes long enough. The world is watching now." Willis's eyes darted to the live stream. His face drained of color. He knew there was no burying this. Not anymore. The tension reached its peak. The town stood on the edge of transformation. For decades, fear and silence had allowed men like Dalton to thrive. But now, with soldiers outside, with a live stream exposing everything, and with Harold Jennings sitting tall despite his wounds, Oak Ridge could no longer pretend. Dalton's voice cracked as he muttered, "You can't touch me. I'm the law here." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "No, you're not the law." The air inside Millie's diner felt electric, every breath thick with tension. Outside, soldiers stood at ease but alert, their presence like a wall of iron around the little town. Inside, all eyes were on the standoff between Colonel Marcus Jennings and Officer Rick Dalton. Dalton's chest rose and fell rapidly, his confidence shattered. The swagger that had carried him into the diner earlier was gone, replaced by trembling hands and darting eyes. Marcus remained steady, calm. His father's composure lived inside him, now sharpened by decades of military discipline. His voice, low but commanding, filled the room. "You struck an old man, not just any old man, my father, a veteran who served a country that still struggles to honor him. You disgraced the badge you wear, and you thought fear would protect you." Dalton swallowed hard, but no words came. Sheriff Willis tried to intervene, his voice hoarse. "Colonel, this isn't the Army's jurisdiction. This is..." Marcus's gaze cut him down mid-sentence. "Jurisdiction ends where abuse begins, Sheriff, and today, this diner is the courtroom." A ripple of agreement moved through the patrons. Fear no longer silenced them. Some nodded, others spoke softly among themselves. Oak Ridge, for once, was ready to confront the truth. Miguel's live stream kept rolling. Comments poured in by the second, now in the tens of thousands. "This cop is finished. No way he survives this. Respect to the Jennings family. True American heroes." Finally, accountability. Dalton's name was trending worldwide. The story of Harold Jennings, the black veteran who had endured humiliation but never bent, now captured hearts far beyond Oak Ridge. Inside the diner, Marcus took one deliberate step toward Dalton. "Do you deny what you did?" Dalton shook his head, stammering, I lost control. He provoked me." The excuse fell flat. The townsfolk murmured disapproval. Harold himself finally spoke, his voice calm, unwavering. "Son, I've been provoked by bullets and bombs, by men who wanted me dead for the color of my skin, but I never raised my hand to the innocent. Losing control isn't an excuse, it's a confession." Dalton lowered his gaze. For the first time, shame broke through his arrogance. Marcus turned to the townsfolk. "For too long, men like him have hidden behind a badge, shielded by silence, but silence is consent. Today, Oak Ridge must decide, will you continue to bow to fear, or will you stand for justice?" It was a call to action, and it hit its mark. Millie, her apron stained with tears and courage, stepped forward. "We stand with Harold." The waitress who had made the call to Marcus added, "No more silence." One by one, voices joined. The young busboy Miguel lifted his chin and declared, "We want justice." The diner filled with affirmation, louder with every voice. Dalton looked around, panic settling in as the walls of silence collapsed around him. Sheriff Willis tried one last desperate move. "You can't arrest him here. Let's handle this quietly." But Marcus shook his head. "Quiet is what allowed this to happen. Justice demands the light." He nodded to Earl, the deputy who had brought the folder of evidence. Earl's hands trembled, but his resolve held. He pulled Dalton's handcuffs from his belt and approached. Dalton stepped back. No, you can't." Earl's voice cracked but carried weight. "Rick Dalton, you're under arrest for assault, abuse of authority, and misconduct." The clink of handcuffs around Dalton's wrists echoed louder than any slap. The same badge he had weaponized now meant nothing. He was no longer the law, he was the accused. When Dalton was let out, the diner exhaled as one. The tension that had suffocated the air lifted. Harold adjusted his glasses, the bruised cheek a reminder of pain, but also of victory. Marcus knelt beside his father, his stern composure softening. "Are you all right, Dad?" Harold placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I've been through worse, but seeing you walk through that door, that was worth every scar I carry." Marcus's throat tightened. "I couldn't let it stand, not after everything you taught me about honor." Harold smiled faintly. "Then I did my job as a father." The exchange was quiet, intimate, yet every soul in the diner felt it. It was the heart of the story, the bond between father and son, forged in honor and defended in strength. By evening, national news outlets descended on Oak Ridge. Cameras crowded Main Street, eager to capture the story of Harold Jennings. Veterans organizations rallied in his name. Civil rights groups demanded reform. Reporters swarmed Marcus, asking what message he hoped people would take. His answer was simple, steady. "My father fought for a country that didn't always fight for him, but he never lost his honor." Justice isn't about revenge, it's about respect, and respect belongs to everyone. The quote spread across networks, a line repeated in headlines and broadcasts. Dalton, meanwhile, sat in a holding cell. The live stream evidence, the complaints unearthed by Earl, and the public outcry left no room for escape. The sheriff who had protected him now scrambled to protect himself. Weeks later, Millie's diner hung a framed photograph on the wall. It showed Harold Jennings seated in his booth, cap on his head, glasses shining under the light, with Marcus standing proudly beside him. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Honor is not given, it is lived." The diner became more than a place to eat. It became a symbol, a reminder that silence is broken by courage, that power misused can be dismantled, and that justice sometimes arrives not with anger, but with dignity. Harold lived his days quietly but proudly, his legacy secured. Marcus continued his service, but Oak Ridge never forgot the day he marched in with soldiers, not to conquer, but to defend the honor of his father. And Dalton? His name became a cautionary tale. Stripped of his badge, awaiting trial, he was no longer feared, he was pitied. For Oak Ridge, the lesson was clear: true power isn't in a badge or a title. True power is in the bond of family, the courage of conviction, and the refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. Do you believe true justice was served here, or was it only partial, with deeper wounds in Oak Ridge still left to heal?